Question 1. Assessment of the appropriate due diligence procedures Saipem should implement when considering a significant partnership with a state-owned enterprise in a jurisdiction with a known history of corruption, focusing on preventing bribery and corruption risks. Option A. Proceed with the partnership based on the perceived stability and influence of the state-owned enterprise, assuming standard commercial practices are sufficient. Option B. Rely exclusively on the assurances provided by the state-owned enterprise's senior management regarding their ethical conduct and compliance measures. Option C. Conduct enhanced due diligence, including background checks on key individuals, analysis of the state-owned enterprise's governance and financial transparency, and assessment of the political and regulatory environment, with findings thoroughly documented. Option D. Delegate the entire due diligence process to a local intermediary, without establishing direct oversight or clear reporting lines for identified risks. Correct answer is C. Conduct enhanced due diligence, including background checks on key individuals, analysis of the state-owned enterprise's governance and financial transparency, and assessment of the political and regulatory environment, with findings thoroughly documented. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Saipem, as a global entity, must navigate complex ethical considerations and potential conflicts of interest when engaging with state-owned enterprises. The core difficulty lies in balancing the pursuit of business opportunities with the imperative to uphold integrity, transparency, and compliance with anti-bribery and corruption regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any engagement is conducted ethically and legally, avoiding even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented due diligence process that specifically assesses the risks associated with engaging with a state-owned entity. This includes understanding the entity's governance structure, identifying any potential conflicts of interest for Saipem personnel or their families, and evaluating the regulatory environment in which the entity operates. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the heightened risks associated with state-owned enterprises, which can be susceptible to corruption and undue influence. By proactively identifying and mitigating these risks, Saipem demonstrates its commitment to ethical business practices and compliance with relevant anti-bribery and corruption laws, such as those that might be enforced under UK regulations if Saipem's operations fall under their jurisdiction, or other applicable international standards Saipem adheres to. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining Saipem's reputation and avoiding legal repercussions. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the engagement without any specific due diligence beyond standard commercial checks. This is ethically and regulatorily flawed because it ignores the unique risks associated with state-owned entities. Such an approach could lead to inadvertent violations of anti-bribery laws, as it fails to identify potential red flags like unusual payment structures or the involvement of politically exposed persons, PEP, who may not be adequately screened. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the reputation of the state-owned entity's leadership without independent verification. This is problematic as it assumes integrity without substantiation, potentially overlooking systemic issues within the entity or its operating environment. This failure to conduct independent verification is a significant ethical lapse and a potential regulatory breach, as it bypasses essential risk assessment steps. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delegate the entire risk assessment to a local agent without establishing clear oversight and reporting mechanisms. While local expertise is valuable, ultimate responsibility for compliance rests with Saipem. This abdication of responsibility can lead to a lack of transparency and accountability, increasing the likelihood of ethical breaches and regulatory noncompliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk-based approach. This begins with identifying potential engagements, followed by a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the nature of the counterparty, the jurisdiction, and the transaction. Where heightened risks are identified, such as with state-owned enterprises, enhanced due diligence is mandatory. This process should be documented, and mitigation strategies implemented and monitored. Regular training and clear communication channels for reporting concerns are also vital components of an effective ethical framework. Question 2. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Saipem project manager to take when a potential client's representative suggests that a significant, undisclosed facilitation fee would greatly improve the chances of securing a lucrative contract, despite Saipem's policy of transparent and competitive bidding? Option A. Agree to include the facilitation fee in the bid, disguised as a legitimate project expense, to ensure Saipem secures the contract and maintains its market position. Option B. Politely decline the suggestion of an undisclosed facilitation fee and reaffirm Saipem's commitment to submitting a transparent and competitive bid based on merit and value, while also reporting the incident internally to the compliance department. Option C. Proceed with the bid as planned, without mentioning the facilitation fee to the client, and hope that the issue is not raised again or that it is perceived as a minor, informal request. Option D. Inform the client's representative that Saipem cannot meet their expectations for an undisclosed fee and suggest they seek proposals from other companies that may be willing to accommodate such requests. The correct answer is B. Politely decline the suggestion of an undisclosed facilitation fee and reaffirm Saipem's commitment to submitting a transparent and competitive bid based on merit and value, while also reporting the incident internally to the compliance department. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and adherence to regulatory standards. The pressure to secure a contract, especially in a competitive market like the oil and gas sector where Saipem operates, can create an environment where shortcuts or ethically questionable practices might seem appealing. However, maintaining integrity and compliance is paramount to Saipem's reputation, legal standing, and sustainable business operations. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing pressures. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to all applicable regulations, even if it means a potential delay or loss of the immediate contract. This approach upholds Saipem's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, which are foundational principles in the industry. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and anti-bribery and corruption legislation that are standard in international business and likely enforced by Saipem's internal policies and the regulatory frameworks governing its operations. By refusing to offer an improper incentive and instead focusing on a legitimate and competitive bid, Saipem demonstrates its dedication to fair dealing and avoids potential legal repercussions, reputational damage, and the establishment of a precedent for unethical behavior. An incorrect approach that involves offering the undisclosed facilitation fee would be a direct violation of anti-bribery and corruption laws. Such a payment, disguised as a facilitation fee, is essentially a bribe intended to improperly influence the decision-making process of the foreign official. This action exposes Saipem to severe penalties, including hefty fines, debarment from future contracts, and criminal prosecution for its employees involved. Furthermore, it undermines the integrity of the procurement process and creates a significant reputational risk, damaging trust with clients, partners, and the public. Another incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the bid without addressing the improper request but hoping it is overlooked, is also professionally unacceptable. This passive stance fails to proactively address a known ethical and legal risk. It implicitly condones the improper request by not challenging it and leaves Saipem vulnerable to future exposure and accusations of complicity. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the company's ethical standards and legal obligations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. First, identify the ethical and legal implications of the request. Second, consult internal company policies and relevant regulations. Third, seek guidance from legal and compliance departments. Fourth, refuse any request that violates ethical principles or legal requirements, even if it impacts short-term business objectives. Finally, document all actions taken and communications related to the situation to ensure accountability and transparency. Question 3. Implementation of a new project management software at Saipem aims to streamline workflows and improve resource allocation. Which of the following approaches best ensures that this optimization initiative adheres to Saipem's commitment to regulatory compliance and operational integrity? Option A. Focus on features that offer the most significant cost savings, assuming that regulatory compliance will be managed through existing separate compliance procedures. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all applicable national and international environmental, health, and safety regulations relevant to Saipem's operations and integrate these requirements into the software's configuration and workflow design from the outset. Option C. Prioritize the fastest software deployment to achieve immediate efficiency gains, with regulatory checks to be performed post-implementation. Option D. Implement the software using a pilot program in a single region, deferring comprehensive regulatory impact assessments until the software is rolled out company-wide. Correct answer is C. Prioritize the fastest software deployment to achieve immediate efficiency gains, with regulatory checks to be performed post-implementation. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Saipem, as a global engineering and construction company, operates under diverse and stringent regulatory frameworks. Ensuring process optimization aligns with these frameworks, particularly concerning environmental protection and safety standards, requires meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of applicable laws. The challenge lies in balancing efficiency gains with compliance, avoiding shortcuts that could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, or harm to personnel and the environment. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and integration of existing regulatory requirements into the process optimization strategy. This means identifying all relevant environmental, health, and safety A's, regulations applicable to Saipem's operations in the specific jurisdictions where the optimization is being implemented. The process optimization should then be designed to not only improve efficiency, but also to enhance compliance and, where possible, exceed minimum regulatory standards. This proactive and integrated approach ensures that optimization efforts are sustainable, legally sound, and ethically responsible, aligning with Saipem's commitment to operational excellence and corporate social responsibility. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction without considering regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for legal obligations, potentially leading to fines, sanctions, and operational disruptions. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed of implementation, overlooking the need for thorough risk assessments and stakeholder consultation regarding regulatory impacts, is also flawed. This can result in the adoption of processes that, while efficient, may inadvertently violate regulations or create new compliance risks. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated or incomplete regulatory knowledge is dangerous. This can lead to the implementation of non-compliant processes, exposing Saipem to significant legal and financial liabilities. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the operational context and the applicable regulatory landscape. This involves proactive research, consultation with legal and EHS experts, and a commitment to integrating compliance into the core of any optimization initiative. The process should include robust risk assessment, impact analysis, and continuous monitoring to ensure ongoing adherence to all relevant laws and guidelines. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that Saipem's project execution processes could be streamlined to enhance efficiency. When considering potential process optimizations, which of the following represents the most professionally responsible and compliant approach for Saipem? Option A. Implement optimizations that demonstrably reduce operational costs and project timelines, with safety and environmental reviews conducted only if significant risks are immediately apparent. Option B. Focus on optimizations that can be rapidly deployed to gain a competitive advantage, assuming that existing standard operating procedures inherently satisfy all regulatory requirements. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of proposed optimizations, rigorously assessing their impact on safety, environmental regulations, contractual obligations, and overall project integrity before any implementation. Option D. Prioritize optimizations that offer the most substantial cost savings, deferring detailed impact assessments on safety, environmental compliance, and contractual obligations until after initial implementation. The correct answer is A. Implement optimizations that demonstrably reduce operational costs and project timelines, with safety and environmental reviews conducted only if significant risks are immediately apparent. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Saipem, as a global engineering and construction company, operates within a complex web of international regulations and ethical standards. Process optimization, while aimed at efficiency, must never compromise safety, environmental protection, or compliance with contractual obligations and local laws. The pressure to achieve cost savings through optimization can create a conflict with these paramount responsibilities, requiring careful judgment to balance competing priorities. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing processes, identifying inefficiencies, and proposing improvements that are rigorously assessed for their impact on safety, environmental compliance, and contractual adherence. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes Saipem's commitment to responsible operations, as mandated by international best practices and likely stipulated in its own corporate governance policies and client contracts. Specifically, it aligns with principles of due diligence, risk management, and ethical conduct expected of a company in Saipem's sector. Adherence to these principles ensures that optimization efforts do not inadvertently lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, or harm to personnel or the environment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering safety implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory frameworks that mandate stringent safety protocols in engineering and construction, such as those overseen by bodies like the Health and Safety Executive (HSE) in the UK or equivalent national authorities. Such an approach risks violating health and safety legislation, leading to potential accidents, injuries, and significant legal liabilities for Saipem. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough impact assessment is also professionally flawed. This overlooks the regulatory requirement for proper environmental impact assessments and the need to obtain necessary permits and approvals before implementing significant process changes. Failing to conduct these assessments can result in environmental damage, contravention of environmental protection laws, and penalties. A third incorrect approach that involves bypassing established quality control procedures to expedite optimization is equally unacceptable. This directly contravenes industry standards and contractual obligations that require rigorous quality assurance and control to ensure the integrity and reliability of projects. Such a shortcut can lead to project failures, defects, and breaches of contract, exposing Saipem to financial penalties and loss of client trust. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk-based approach. This includes 1. Clearly defining the objectives of process optimization, ensuring they are aligned with Saipem's strategic goals and ethical commitments. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment for each proposed optimization, evaluating potential impacts on safety, environment, quality, and compliance. 3. Engaging relevant stakeholders, including safety officers, environmental specialists, legal counsel, and project managers, in the review process. 4. Ensuring that all proposed changes are vetted against applicable regulations and contractual terms. 5. Documenting the entire process, including risk assessments and mitigation strategies, to demonstrate due diligence. Question 5. During the evaluation of potential process optimizations for Saipem's offshore engineering projects, a team proposes streamlining the approval workflow for minor design modifications by reducing the number of sign-offs required from senior engineers and compliance officers. This is intended to accelerate project timelines and reduce administrative overhead. What is the most professionally responsible approach for Saipem to take in evaluating this proposal? Option A. Proceed with the streamlined workflow on a trial basis for a single project, and only if no immediate issues arise, consider wider adoption. Option B. Conduct a detailed risk assessment of the proposed changes, consulting with legal, compliance, and relevant engineering departments to ensure adherence to all applicable regulations and Saipem's internal policies before any implementation. Option C. Delegate the decision-making authority for this workflow change to the project management team, trusting their judgment on the balance between efficiency and compliance. Option D. Implement the proposed streamlined approval workflow immediately, as the potential for time and cost savings is significant and the modifications are deemed minor. The correct answer is D. Implement the proposed streamlined approval workflow immediately, as the potential for time and cost savings is significant and the modifications are deemed minor. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for efficiency with the long-term implications of process changes on compliance and operational integrity. Saipem, as a global entity, operates under a complex web of regulations, and any process optimization must not inadvertently create non-compliance or introduce new risks. The core challenge lies in identifying improvements that are both effective and legally sound, ensuring that shortcuts do not compromise safety, environmental standards, or contractual obligations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine optimization and potentially risky expediency. The correct approach involves a thorough, risk-based assessment that prioritizes regulatory adherence and stakeholder consultation. This means meticulously reviewing existing processes against Saipem's established internal policies, relevant industry best practices, and the specific legal and regulatory frameworks applicable to its operations in the relevant jurisdictions. It necessitates engaging with legal, compliance, and operational teams to identify potential impacts and ensure that any proposed changes are robustly vetted for compliance before implementation. This approach ensures that process optimization contributes to sustainable efficiency without compromising Saipem's commitment to ethical conduct and legal obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a comprehensive compliance review is professionally unacceptable. This could lead to overlooking critical regulatory requirements, potentially resulting in fines, project delays, reputational damage, and even operational shutdowns. Another incorrect approach that bypasses internal control mechanisms or expert consultation, such as seeking external advice without internal validation, risks implementing solutions that are not aligned with Saipem's specific operational context or regulatory landscape. This can lead to inefficiencies in the long run due to rework or the need for subsequent corrective actions. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, without adequate documentation or impact analysis, undermines the principles of good governance and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory environment. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and internal policies. Next, a risk assessment should be conducted for any proposed process change, evaluating potential impacts on compliance, safety, environment, and quality. Stakeholder engagement, including legal and compliance departments, is crucial to gather diverse perspectives and ensure all angles are considered. Finally, a phased implementation with continuous monitoring and feedback loops allows for adjustments and reinforces the commitment to both efficiency and compliance. Question 6. The control framework reveals that a Saipem procurement officer is responsible for evaluating bids for a significant project. The officer discovers that one of the bidding companies is owned by their sibling. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the procurement officer to take to ensure regulatory compliance and maintain ethical standards within Saipem? Option A. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to Saipem's compliance department and recuse themselves from all aspects of the vendor selection process for this project. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation, ensuring the siblings' company is treated fairly but without any special consideration, and hope the relationship is not discovered. Option C. Continue with the evaluation as normal, assuming their familial relationship does not constitute a conflict of interest unless explicitly stated in company policy. Option D. Discreetly advocate for the siblings' company during internal discussions, highlighting their strengths without explicitly mentioning the familial connection. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the familial relationship to Saipem's compliance department and recuse themselves from all aspects of the vendor selection process for this project. Explanation. The control framework reveals a potential conflict of interest scenario within Saipem's procurement department. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate ethical considerations and potential regulatory breaches while upholding the company's integrity and compliance standards. The core of the challenge lies in identifying and acting upon situations where personal relationships might improperly influence business decisions, thereby compromising fairness and transparency. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the relevant compliance or legal department. This upholds Saipem's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence by ensuring that any potential conflict is identified, assessed, and managed appropriately by an independent body within the company. This proactive measure allows Saipem to implement safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes or enhanced oversight, thereby preventing any actual or perceived impropriety. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and the spirit of regulations designed to prevent corruption and ensure fair competition. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the vendor selection without disclosure risks violating Saipem's internal code of conduct and potentially external anti-bribery and corruption regulations. This failure to disclose creates an environment where decisions could be influenced by personal bias rather than objective merit, leading to unfair vendor selection and potential financial detriment to Saipem. Another incorrect approach of subtly favoring the acquaintance's company, even without explicit discussion, is also a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This constitutes a breach of trust and can be construed as a form of preferential treatment, undermining the integrity of the procurement process. Finally, ignoring the situation and hoping it goes unnoticed is a dereliction of professional duty and a direct contravention of compliance obligations. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to overlook potential misconduct, which can have severe legal and reputational consequences for both the individual and Saipem. Professionals in similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to company policy, and regulatory compliance. This involves recognizing potential conflicts, understanding the company's reporting mechanisms for such issues, and acting decisively to disclose and seek guidance from the appropriate internal authorities. The guiding principle should always be to act in the best interest of the company and to maintain the highest standards of ethical conduct. Question 7. Performance analysis shows that Saipem's offshore construction project in a protected marine area is facing delays due to unforeseen geological conditions. To meet contractual deadlines, there is pressure to expedite the remaining phases, which could potentially increase the risk of sediment disturbance and impact local marine life. Which of the following approaches best balances project urgency with regulatory compliance and environmental responsibility? Option A. Delegate the decision-making for accelerated methods to the site management team, trusting their on-the-ground experience to manage environmental risks within acceptable, albeit less formally documented, parameters. Option B. Proceed with the original environmental mitigation plan, arguing that the project's critical nature justifies a pragmatic approach to minor deviations, and focus on documenting any observed environmental changes for future reporting. Option C. Immediately implement accelerated construction methods, assuming that any minor environmental deviations will be addressed through post-construction remediation efforts and reported as part of routine operational updates. Option D. Halt all operations to conduct a supplementary, in-depth environmental impact assessment focusing on the specific geological challenges, and develop revised mitigation strategies in consultation with environmental experts and regulatory bodies before resuming any accelerated activities. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement accelerated construction methods, assuming that any minor environmental deviations will be addressed through post-construction remediation efforts and reported as part of routine operational updates. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between achieving project milestones and adhering to stringent environmental regulations. Saipem, as a global energy services company, operates under a complex web of international and local environmental laws, which are critical for maintaining its license to operate, corporate reputation, and avoiding significant financial penalties. The pressure to expedite a project, especially in a sensitive marine environment, necessitates a careful balancing act between operational efficiency and environmental stewardship. Professional judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not lead to long-term environmental damage or regulatory noncompliance. The correct approach involves a thorough and documented environmental impact assessment (IA) that considers all potential risks and proposes robust mitigation measures, even if it means adjusting project timelines. This aligns with the principles of sustainable development and responsible corporate conduct, which are increasingly embedded in regulatory frameworks globally. Specifically, adherence to international environmental standards and national legislation governing offshore operations, such as those pertaining to marine pollution, biodiversity protection, and waste management, is paramount. A proactive and transparent engagement with regulatory bodies and stakeholders, ensuring all mitigation strategies are approved and implemented, demonstrates a commitment to compliance and environmental protection. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with project acceleration without a comprehensive EIA, or by downplaying identified environmental risks. This could lead to violations of environmental protection laws, potentially resulting in fines, project suspension, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to implement mitigation measures that are superficial or not fully compliant with regulatory requirements, such as using unproven technologies or inadequate monitoring protocols. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the spirit, if not the letter, of the law. Furthermore, attempting to bypass or expedite regulatory approval processes without proper justification or documentation would be a clear ethical and legal failing, undermining the integrity of the regulatory framework and Saipem's commitment to responsible operations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic risk assessment, prioritizing regulatory compliance and environmental protection. This includes consulting with environmental experts, engaging with relevant authorities early in the planning phase, and ensuring that all project activities are aligned with the most current and applicable environmental regulations. A culture of transparency and accountability, where potential environmental impacts are openly discussed and addressed, is crucial for navigating such challenges effectively. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that Saipem is considering engaging a new third-party intermediary to facilitate a significant project in a region known for its complex business environment and varying levels of regulatory oversight. The intermediary has been recommended by a trusted contact, but Saipem has limited direct knowledge of their operations or compliance history. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Saipem's commitment to robust anti-bribery and corruption compliance? Option A. Delegate the entire due diligence process to the intermediary themselves, asking them to provide a report on their own compliance status. Option B. Proceed with the engagement after obtaining a general assurance from the intermediary that they adhere to ethical business practices and have no history of corruption. Option C. Engage the intermediary based on the recommendation of the trusted contact, assuming their endorsement is sufficient to mitigate any potential risks. Option D. Conduct comprehensive due diligence on the intermediary, including background checks, verification of their business reputation, assessment of their financial stability, and an evaluation of their internal compliance controls and procedures. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the engagement after obtaining a general assurance from the intermediary that they adhere to ethical business practices and have no history of corruption. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Saipem, as a global entity, must navigate the complexities of international business while adhering to stringent ethical and regulatory standards. The core difficulty lies in balancing the pursuit of business opportunities with the imperative to prevent illicit activities, particularly bribery and corruption, which can have severe legal, financial, and reputational consequences. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate risks associated with third-party intermediaries, who may operate in environments with differing levels of regulatory enforcement or ethical norms. The correct approach involves conducting a thorough due diligence process on the potential third-party intermediary. This process should be comprehensive, encompassing background checks, verification of their business reputation, assessment of their financial standing, and an understanding of their existing relationships and compliance programs. The justification for this approach stems directly from the principles of robust anti-bribery and corruption compliance programs, which are mandated by regulations such as the UK Bribery Act 2010 and the US Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA. These regulations place a significant onus on companies to prevent bribery by persons performing services on their behalf. Conducting thorough due diligence is a cornerstone of demonstrating that Saipem has taken reasonable steps to prevent corruption, thereby mitigating its legal exposure and upholding its ethical commitments. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the engagement without any form of due diligence, assuming the intermediary's reputation is sufficient based on a brief introduction. This fails to meet the reasonable steps standard required by anti-bribery laws. It creates a significant risk that Saipem could be held liable for the actions of the intermediary, even if Saipem itself did not directly participate in any corrupt act. Another incorrect approach is to conduct superficial due diligence, such as a simple online search, without verifying the information or delving into the intermediary's operational history and compliance framework. This approach is inadequate because it does not provide sufficient assurance regarding the intermediary's integrity and could still expose Saipem to undue risk. Regulatory bodies expect a proactive and substantive investigation, not a perfunctory check. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the intermediary's self-certification of compliance without independent verification. While self-certification can be a component of due diligence, it is not a substitute for independent verification, especially when dealing with high-risk jurisdictions or activities. This approach overlooks the potential for misrepresentation or a lack of genuine understanding of compliance obligations by the intermediary. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a risk-based approach. Saipem should first assess the inherent risk associated with the engagement, considering factors such as the country of operation, the nature of the services provided, and the intermediary's role. Based on this risk assessment, a proportionate level of due diligence should be applied. This process should be documented, and any red flags identified during due diligence must be thoroughly investigated and addressed before proceeding with the engagement. If risks cannot be adequately mitigated, Saipem should be prepared to decline the engagement. Question 9. The assessment process reveals that a junior analyst at Saipem has prepared an initial draft of a financial report for an upcoming investor presentation. The draft presents a highly optimistic outlook, exceeding initial internal projections. The analyst is under pressure to finalize the report quickly for the presentation. The analyst is unsure if all the accounting treatments applied are fully compliant with the latest International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, as adopted by the relevant jurisdiction for Saipem's reporting, particularly concerning revenue recognition for a complex, multi-year project. Which of the following represents the most professionally responsible course of action for the analyst? Option A. Omit the specific details of the complex project's revenue recognition from the report to avoid potential scrutiny and focus on other, more straightforward financial data. Option B. Proceed with the draft report as is, assuming the optimistic figures are acceptable for an initial presentation and that detailed compliance checks can be performed later. Option C. Immediately flag the uncertainties regarding IFRS compliance to their direct supervisor and request guidance from Saipem's internal accounting standards team or external auditors before finalizing any figures. Option D. Adjust the accounting treatments to align with the optimistic projection, rationalizing that the presentation is for internal discussion and not a formal financial statement. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the draft report as is, assuming the optimistic figures are acceptable for an initial presentation and that detailed compliance checks can be performed later. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid growth and the stringent regulatory requirements governing financial reporting and disclosure. Saipem, as a publicly listed entity, is bound by specific legal and regulatory frameworks that mandate transparency and accuracy in its financial communications. The pressure to present a favorable financial picture can tempt individuals to overlook or misinterpret complex accounting standards, leading to potential misstatements. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with legal and ethical obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of the financial data, adhering strictly to the applicable accounting standards and Saipem's internal policies. This includes seeking clarification from internal or external experts when uncertainties arise, and ensuring that all disclosures are complete, accurate, and not misleading. This approach is professionally sound because it upholds the principles of integrity and due diligence mandated by regulatory bodies. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of accurate financial reporting and transparency expected of listed companies, preventing potential breaches of financial regulations and maintaining investor confidence. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the initial, potentially optimistic, financial projections without rigorous verification would constitute a failure to exercise due professional care. This could lead to material misstatements in financial reports, violating accounting standards and potentially securities laws. Another incorrect approach, that of downplaying or omitting potentially negative financial indicators to present a more favorable outlook, would be a direct contravention of disclosure obligations and could be construed as misleading investors, a serious ethical and regulatory breach. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy, even with the intention of meeting deadlines, risks overlooking critical details that could impact the true financial position of Saipem, thereby failing to meet the standards of professional conduct. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. identifying the core issue and potential conflicts. 2. Consulting relevant regulatory frameworks, accounting standards, and company policies. 3. Seeking expert advice when necessary. 4. Documenting all decisions and justifications. 5. Escalating concerns through appropriate channels if a compliant path cannot be agreed upon. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with professional responsibilities. Question 10. Operational review demonstrates that certain project execution phases within Saipem are experiencing delays and increased resource allocation compared to initial projections. To address this, a proposal has been put forth to streamline approval processes by reducing the number of mandatory sign-offs from key technical and safety personnel, arguing that this will accelerate project timelines and reduce overhead costs. What is the most appropriate course of action for Saipem to take in response to this operational review finding? Option A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the delays and resource overruns, assessing the impact of proposed streamlining on regulatory compliance, safety standards, and contractual obligations before implementing any changes. Option B. Immediately implement the proposed streamlining of approval processes by reducing mandatory sign-offs, as the projected cost savings and acceleration of project timelines are deemed to be of paramount importance for competitive advantage. Option C. Focus solely on identifying areas for potential cost reduction in the operational review and implement any proposed changes that offer immediate financial benefits, deferring detailed compliance checks to a later stage. Option D. Delegate the decision-making authority for streamlining approval processes to individual project managers, allowing them to implement changes based on their immediate project needs and perceived efficiencies. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the delays and resource overruns, assessing the impact of proposed streamlining on regulatory compliance, safety standards, and contractual obligations before implementing any changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Saipem, as a global engineering and construction company, operates within a complex web of international regulations and ethical standards. When an operational review identifies potential process inefficiencies, the company must balance the drive for optimization with its obligations to stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, and the public. The challenge lies in identifying improvements that are not only economically beneficial, but also compliant with all applicable laws, ethical codes, and industry best practices, particularly concerning safety, environmental protection, and fair business conduct. A hasty or poorly considered approach to process optimization could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and financial penalties. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, data-driven assessment that prioritizes sustainable and compliant improvements. This means thoroughly evaluating the identified inefficiencies, understanding their root causes, and then developing solutions that align with Saipem's commitment to operational excellence, safety, and integrity. This approach is justified by the overarching regulatory framework governing Saipem's operations, which mandates adherence to laws concerning environmental impact, worker safety, and anti-corruption. Furthermore, ethical considerations require that any process changes do not negatively impact employee well-being or compromise the quality and safety of Saipem's projects. This method ensures that optimization efforts contribute positively to the company's long-term viability and reputation. An incorrect approach would be to implement changes solely based on perceived cost savings, without a thorough risk assessment or regulatory compliance check. For instance, bypassing established safety protocols to speed up a process, even if it appears more efficient on paper, would be a direct violation of safety regulations and ethical responsibilities. Similarly, adopting shortcuts that might circumvent environmental protection measures would contravene environmental laws and corporate social responsibility commitments. Another flawed approach would be to implement changes that disproportionately burden employees or lead to unfair labor practices, which could violate labor laws and ethical standards of fair treatment. These approaches fail because they prioritize short-term gains over long-term compliance and ethical conduct, exposing Saipem to significant legal and reputational risks. Professionals should approach process optimization by first establishing a clear understanding of the current operational state and the specific inefficiencies identified. This should be followed by a rigorous analysis of potential solutions, considering their impact on safety, environmental compliance, legal obligations, and ethical considerations. A multidisciplinary team, including legal, compliance, safety, and operational experts, should be involved in evaluating proposed changes. The decision-making process should be guided by a framework that prioritizes regulatory adherence, ethical integrity, and sustainable business practices, ensuring that any implemented changes are robust, compliant, and contribute to Saipem's overall strategic objectives. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that Saipem is considering a new project in a region with evolving geopolitical stability. A key stakeholder has provided preliminary information suggesting significant potential for high returns, but also hints at potential operational disruptions due to local unrest. Which approach to assessing the risks associated with this project is most aligned with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for a company like Saipem? Option A. Focus exclusively on the projected financial gains of the project, treating any mention of potential operational disruptions as secondary concerns that can be addressed only if they materialize and directly impact profitability. Option B. Rely primarily on the preliminary information provided by the key stakeholder, focusing on the potential for high returns, and assuming that any operational disruptions will be minor and manageable without extensive formal analysis. Option C. Prioritize the speed of decision-making by conducting a quick review of the potential returns and only briefly acknowledging the possibility of operational disruptions, without in-depth investigation or documentation. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that involves gathering objective data from multiple sources, engaging internal and external experts, documenting all findings, and developing a detailed mitigation plan while considering the potential impact on Saipem's reputation and compliance obligations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that involves gathering objective data from multiple sources, engaging internal and external experts, documenting all findings, and developing a detailed mitigation plan while considering the potential impact on Saipem's reputation and compliance obligations. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Saipem, as a global energy services company, operates in diverse regulatory environments and faces complex risk landscapes. The assessment requires understanding how to apply risk assessment principles within the specific context of Saipem's operations and the implied regulatory framework of a hiring assessment test, which typically aligns with professional conduct and ethical standards expected in the industry. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate and compliant approach to risk assessment when faced with incomplete information and potential conflicts of interest. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process that prioritizes objective data and expert judgment while adhering to Saipem's internal policies and relevant industry best practices. This approach ensures that risks are identified, analyzed, and evaluated in a structured manner, leading to informed decision-making and mitigation strategies. Regulatory compliance and ethical considerations are paramount, demanding transparency and a commitment to avoiding conflicts of interest. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management expected of employees in a reputable organization like Saipem. An incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal evidence or personal opinions fails to meet the rigor required for effective risk assessment. It lacks objectivity and can be influenced by biases, leading to inaccurate risk evaluations and potentially detrimental business decisions. Such an approach also disregards the importance of documented evidence and established methodologies, which are often mandated by internal company policies and external regulatory bodies to ensure accountability and consistency. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness overlooks critical steps in the risk assessment process. This can result in the identification of superficial risks, while deeper, more significant threats remain undetected. The absence of a comprehensive analysis can lead to inadequate mitigation plans, leaving Saipem vulnerable to unforeseen events and potential financial or reputational damage. This haste also undermines the principle of due diligence, a cornerstone of responsible business operations. A third incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on potential financial gains without considering the associated risks is inherently flawed. Risk assessment is fundamentally about understanding and managing potential downsides, not solely about maximizing upside. Ignoring or downplaying risks in pursuit of profit can lead to reckless decision-making, exposing Saipem to unacceptable levels of exposure and potentially violating regulatory requirements related to prudent financial management and corporate responsibility. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. Second, gather relevant and reliable data from multiple sources, including historical performance, expert opinions, and market intelligence. Third, apply established risk assessment methodologies to identify, analyze, and evaluate risks. Fourth, document all findings and assumptions thoroughly. Fifth, develop and implement appropriate risk mitigation strategies. Finally, regularly review and update the risk assessment to account for changing circumstances. This systematic process ensures that decisions are based on sound judgment, evidence, and a commitment to Saipem's long-term success and compliance. Question 12. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of potential cost overruns and schedule delays on a critical Saipem project. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation in accordance with UK regulations and SISI guidelines for risk management? Option A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the performance deviations. Assess the potential impact of identified risks on project objectives and Saipem's overall business, and develop a prioritized mitigation plan. Option B. Immediately implement across-the-board budget cuts and mandate overtime for all project personnel to catch up on the schedule. Option C. Focus solely on accelerating the remaining project phases by reallocating resources from less critical tasks without a formal risk assessment. Option D. Defer a formal risk assessment until the project completion phase to avoid disrupting ongoing operations. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the performance deviations. Assess the potential impact of identified risks on project objectives and Saipem's overall business, and develop a prioritized mitigation plan. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Saipem, as a global engineering and construction company, operates in diverse regulatory environments. The performance metrics indicating potential cost overruns and schedule delays necessitate a proactive risk assessment to identify and mitigate issues before they escalate. The challenge lies in balancing the need for swift action with the requirement for thorough, compliant analysis, ensuring that any proposed solutions adhere strictly to the Saipem hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework, which for this exam is assumed to be UK regulation and SISI guidelines. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that prioritizes identifying root causes, evaluating potential impacts, and developing mitigation strategies, all while adhering to the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct as outlined in UK regulations and SISI guidelines. This approach ensures that decisions are data-driven, compliant, and aligned with Saipem's strategic objectives and risk appetite. It involves a systematic process of risk identification, analysis, evaluation, and treatment, which is fundamental to effective project management and corporate responsibility under UK law and SISI standards. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement cost-cutting measures without a thorough understanding of their potential impact on project quality, safety, or contractual obligations. This could lead to further delays, increased costs in the long run, and potential breaches of contract or regulatory requirements, such as those related to health and safety under UK legislation. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on schedule acceleration without a corresponding assessment of the associated risks, such as increased overtime leading to fatigue and potential accidents, or compromising quality control, which would violate safety regulations and professional standards. Finally, ignoring the performance metrics altogether or delaying a formal risk assessment would be a failure to exercise due diligence and could expose Saipem to significant financial, reputational, and legal risks, contravening the proactive risk management expectations under UK corporate law and SISI ethical codes. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the problem as presented by the performance metrics. This should be followed by a systematic risk assessment process, consulting relevant project documentation, and engaging with key stakeholders. The assessment should identify potential risks, analyze their likelihood and impact, and evaluate them against established criteria. Mitigation strategies should then be developed, considering their feasibility, cost-effectiveness, and compliance with all applicable regulations and ethical standards. The chosen course of action should be documented, communicated, and monitored for effectiveness. Question 13. Investigation of a Saipem project manager's interactions with a potential client's procurement officer reveals a pattern of frequent, expensive dinners and the offer of a significant consulting fee to the officer's relative, purportedly to smooth the process for a multi-million-dollar contract Saipem is bidding on. What is the most appropriate course of action for the project manager? Option A. Inform the procurement officer that Saipem cannot engage in such practices and withdraw from the bidding process to avoid any potential complications. Option B. Proceed with the contract bid, assuming the consulting fee is a legitimate business expense and the dinners are standard client entertainment. Option C. Immediately cease all interactions with the procurement officer and report the situation to Saipem's compliance department, providing all documented evidence of the interactions and the offer. Option D. Accept the consulting fee, offer to ensure the contract is secured, and continue with the expensive dinners as a gesture of goodwill. The correct answer is C. Immediately cease all interactions with the procurement officer and report the situation to Saipem's compliance department, providing all documented evidence of the interactions and the offer. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's immediate financial interests and its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to secure a significant contract, especially for a company like Saipem, can create an environment where ethical boundaries might be tested. Careful judgment is required to navigate the potential for undue influence and ensure that all business dealings adhere to the highest standards of integrity and compliance. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparency and adherence to Saipem's internal code of conduct and relevant anti-bribery and corruption laws. This means clearly documenting all interactions, ensuring that any gifts or hospitality are modest, proportionate, and within the bounds of established company policy and applicable regulations. The justification for this approach lies in preventing even the appearance of impropriety, which can have severe legal and reputational consequences. Adhering to these principles safeguards Saipem from allegations of bribery or corruption, upholding its commitment to fair competition and ethical business practices. An incorrect approach would be to disregard the potential for conflict of interest or to interpret the company's hospitality policy too broadly. For instance, accepting lavish gifts or offering substantial financial inducements, even if framed as facilitation payments or relationship building, would constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such actions could violate anti-bribery laws, such as the UK Bribery Act, if applicable to Saipem's operations in that jurisdiction, which prohibits offering, promising, or giving a bribe, as well as accepting or soliciting one. Ethically, it undermines the principle of fair dealing and can lead to a perception of corruption, damaging Saipem's reputation and potentially leading to disqualification from future contracts. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the interactions altogether, failing to document them or report them internally. This lack of transparency creates a blind spot, making it impossible to demonstrate compliance and potentially concealing unethical or illegal activities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance above short-term gains. This involves understanding and internalizing company policies and relevant laws, seeking clarification when in doubt, maintaining meticulous records, and fostering a culture where ethical concerns can be raised without fear of reprisal. When faced with situations that could be perceived as compromising integrity, the professional should err on the side of caution, consult with legal or compliance departments, and ensure that all actions are defensible and align with Saipem's values and legal obligations. Question 14. Strategic planning requires Saipem to evaluate the potential impact of a new market entry strategy on its existing compliance framework and adherence to international anti-bribery and corruption laws. Which of the following approaches best ensures that the strategic plan is both commercially viable and ethically sound? Option A. Proceed with the market entry based on initial market research, assuming that any compliance issues can be addressed reactively once operations commence. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive due diligence process that identifies all potential regulatory and ethical risks associated with the new market, develops robust mitigation plans, and integrates these into the strategic plan before final approval. Option C. focus primarily on the potential revenue generation of the new market, with a cursory review of compliance requirements to ensure basic adherence. Option D. Seek legal counsel only if significant compliance challenges are explicitly identified during the initial stages of market entry. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive due diligence process that identifies all potential regulatory and ethical risks associated with the new market, develops robust mitigation plans, and integrates these into the strategic plan before final approval. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's strategic growth objectives and the imperative to maintain robust compliance with Saipem's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. The pressure to secure a significant contract can lead to a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance risks, which is a critical failure in professional judgment. Careful consideration of all implications, including regulatory adherence and ethical conduct, is paramount. The correct approach involves a thorough and proactive impact assessment that integrates compliance considerations from the outset of strategic planning. This means identifying potential regulatory hurdles, assessing their severity, and developing mitigation strategies before committing to a course of action. This approach aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and risk management, ensuring that Saipem operates within legal boundaries and upholds its ethical commitments. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to due diligence and responsible business practices, which are often mandated by industry regulations and internal codes of conduct designed to prevent bribery, corruption, and other illicit activities. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate contract acquisition over compliance risks is fundamentally flawed. This could manifest as a superficial review of regulatory requirements, assuming that any identified issues can be addressed later, or a decision to proceed without fully understanding the potential legal and reputational consequences. Such an approach fails to uphold the duty of care expected of professionals and can lead to severe penalties, including fines, debarment from future contracts, and significant damage to Saipem's reputation. It also demonstrates a disregard for the ethical principles that underpin fair competition and responsible business conduct. Another incorrect approach might involve seeking to circumvent or interpret regulations in a manner that is technically permissible but ethically questionable, aiming to gain a competitive advantage through loopholes rather than genuine compliance. This undermines the spirit of the regulations and can still expose the company to significant risk. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the strategic objective. This should be followed by a comprehensive identification of all relevant regulatory requirements and internal policies. A thorough risk assessment, considering the likelihood and impact of non-compliance, is then essential. Mitigation strategies should be developed and evaluated for their effectiveness and feasibility. Finally, decisions should be made based on a balanced consideration of strategic goals, risk tolerance, and unwavering adherence to legal and ethical standards. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that Saipem is facing an urgent need to fill critical roles for an ongoing project, but the standard recruitment process outlined in the Saipem Hiring Assessment Test Guidelines presents ambiguities regarding the eligibility criteria for candidates with non-traditional experience. To ensure project continuity, while upholding the integrity of the hiring process, which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory compliance and ethical recruitment practices? Option A. Halt all project activities until the Saipem Hiring Assessment Test Guidelines can be comprehensively revised to eliminate all potential ambiguities, regardless of the impact on project timelines. Option B. Proactively engage with Saipem's legal and HR compliance departments to interpret the ambiguous criteria within the Saipem Hiring Assessment Test Guidelines, document the agreed-upon interpretation, and proceed with hiring based on that documented guidance, while also flagging the ambiguity for future guideline revision. Option C. Expedite the hiring process by temporarily suspending the ambiguous sections of the Saipem Hiring Assessment Test Guidelines to meet the project deadline, with a commitment to revisit the guidelines post-project. Option D. Proceed with hiring the most qualified candidates based on the hiring manager's discretion, assuming the spirit of the Saipem Hiring Assessment Test Guidelines is met, without formal clarification. The correct answer is B. Proactively engage with Saipem's legal and HR compliance departments to interpret the ambiguous criteria within the Saipem hiring assessment test guidelines, document the agreed-upon interpretation, and proceed with hiring based on that documented guidance, while also flagging the ambiguity for future guideline revision. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Saipem to balance the immediate need for project progress with its fundamental obligations to adhere to the Saipem hiring assessment test's regulatory framework, which implicitly includes principles of fair and transparent recruitment. The pressure to meet project timelines can create a temptation to bypass established procedures, but doing so carries significant risks of regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that operational demands do not compromise ethical and legal recruitment standards. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with the relevant internal departments and external regulatory bodies to seek clarification and guidance on the interpretation and application of the Saipem hiring assessment test's guidelines in the context of the urgent hiring need. This demonstrates a commitment to due diligence and regulatory adherence. Specifically, it involves a structured process of identifying the ambiguity, seeking expert interpretation, and documenting the decision-making process. This aligns with best practices in corporate governance and compliance, ensuring that Saipem acts responsibly and ethically, even under pressure. The regulatory justification lies in upholding the integrity of the hiring process as mandated by the assessment framework, preventing potential discrimination or unfair advantage, and maintaining Saipem's reputation as a compliant and ethical employer. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the hiring without seeking clarification risks violating the spirit and letter of the Saipem hiring assessment test's guidelines. This could lead to accusations of favoritism, bias, or a lack of due process, undermining the credibility of the assessment and Saipem's recruitment practices. Another incorrect approach, such as delaying the project to conduct a full, standard review while seemingly cautious, fails to address the immediate operational need and may not be the most efficient or proportionate response if a reasonable interpretation of the guidelines is possible. This could lead to missed business opportunities and increased project costs, demonstrating a lack of strategic agility. A third incorrect approach, such as selectively applying parts of the assessment framework, is a clear violation of regulatory principles, as it suggests a disregard for the comprehensive nature of the guidelines and opens Saipem to charges of procedural impropriety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, clearly identify the specific regulatory or ethical dilemma. Second, consult the relevant governing documents, in this case, the Saipem hiring assessment test framework, and seek clarification from legal or compliance departments. Third, assess the potential risks and benefits of different courses of action, considering both operational needs and regulatory obligations. Fourth, document all steps taken, consultations, and decisions made. Finally, implement the chosen course of action and monitor its effectiveness and compliance. Question 16. When evaluating potential third-party intermediaries for a project in a high-risk jurisdiction, what is the most appropriate approach for Saipem to ensure compliance with anti-bribery and corruption regulations? Option A. Prioritize the speed of project commencement by engaging the intermediary immediately and addressing compliance concerns later. Option B. Perform a cursory review of the intermediary's business registration documents and a brief online search. Option C. Conduct thorough due diligence, including background checks, risk assessments, and ongoing monitoring, to identify and mitigate potential bribery and corruption risks. Option D. Rely on the intermediary's stated reputation and assurances of ethical conduct without further verification. The correct answer is C. Conduct thorough due diligence, including background checks, risk assessments, and ongoing monitoring, to identify and mitigate potential bribery and corruption risks. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Saipem, as a global engineering and construction company, operates under a complex web of international and national regulations. Navigating these requirements, particularly concerning anti-bribery and corruption, ABC laws, demands meticulous attention to detail and a robust understanding of compliance frameworks. The challenge lies in ensuring that all business dealings, especially with third parties who may act on Saipem's behalf, adhere strictly to the highest ethical standards and legal mandates, preventing any potential for illicit payments or undue influence. Correct approach involves implementing a comprehensive due diligence process for all third parties, which includes thorough background checks, risk assessments, and ongoing monitoring. This proactive stance is crucial for identifying and mitigating potential ABC risks before engaging with a third party. Regulatory frameworks, such as the UK Bribery Act 2010, which is highly relevant for companies with international operations like Saipem, given its global reach and potential for UK nexus, mandate that companies take all reasonable steps to prevent bribery. This includes having adequate procedures in place for dealing with third parties. Ethical considerations also demand that Saipem avoids any association with individuals or entities that could compromise its integrity or reputation. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with engaging a third party without conducting adequate due diligence, relying solely on their reputation or assurances. This failure to verify could expose Saipem to significant legal and financial penalties under ABC legislation, as it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for preventative measures. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct superficial due diligence that only scratches the surface of a third party's background, failing to uncover red flags or potential conflicts of interest. This also falls short of the all reasonable steps requirement and could lead to inadvertent complicity in corrupt practices. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of business over compliance by bypassing or rushing due diligence is fundamentally flawed and ethically unsound, as it signals a willingness to overlook potential risks for commercial gain. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to due diligence, tailoring the level of scrutiny to the specific third party and the nature of the engagement. This involves understanding the business context, the geographic location, the industry, and the potential for interaction with government officials. A robust decision-making framework would involve 1. Identifying potential ABC risks associated with the third party and the proposed engagement. 2. Designing and executing due diligence procedures proportionate to those risks. 3. Evaluating the findings of the due diligence to determine if the risks are acceptable or require mitigation. And 4. Making an informed decision on whether to engage the third party, with appropriate contractual safeguards and ongoing monitoring in place. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that Saipem is considering engaging a third-party consultancy to gather competitive intelligence in a region where business practices may differ significantly from UK standards. The consultancy proposes to provide insights into competitor pricing, project pipelines, and potential tender strategies. Saipem's compliance team must ensure that the engagement and the intelligence gathered strictly adhere to the UK Bribery Act 2010. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with the UK Bribery Act 2010? Option A. Conduct thorough due diligence on the third-party consultancy, verifying their reputation, understanding their data acquisition methods, and ensuring they have robust anti-bribery policies and procedures in place, and then obtain written assurances that all intelligence will be gathered ethically and legally. Option B. Assume that since the intelligence is gathered in a foreign jurisdiction, the UK Bribery Act 2010 will not apply to the consultancy's actions. Option C. Interpret competitive intelligence broadly to include any information that provides an advantage, regardless of the methods used to obtain it, as long as it is not directly paid for as a bribe. Option D. Accept the consultancy's assurances at face value, as they are a reputable firm, and focus on the strategic value of the intelligence provided. The correct answer is A. Conduct thorough due diligence on the third-party consultancy, verifying their reputation, understanding their data acquisition methods, and ensuring they have robust anti-bribery policies and procedures in place, and then obtain written assurances that all intelligence will be gathered ethically and legally. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Saipem's compliance team as they navigate the complexities of international business while adhering to a specific regulatory framework. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for competitive advantage through market intelligence with the stringent requirements of anti-bribery and corruption legislation. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that information gathering practices are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and strict application of the UK Bribery Act 2010. This legislation places a strong emphasis on preventing bribery, including the offering, promising, giving, accepting, or soliciting of a bribe. It also includes a specific offense of failing to prevent bribery, which places a corporate responsibility on companies like Saipem to have adequate procedures in place. Therefore, gathering market intelligence through third-party consultants requires a robust due diligence process to ensure these consultants operate ethically and do not engage in or facilitate bribery. This includes verifying their reputation, understanding their methods, and ensuring they have their own anti-bribery policies. This proactive and preventative stance aligns with the spirit and letter of the UK Bribery Act, safeguarding Saipem from potential liability and upholding its ethical standards. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the consultant's assurances without independent verification. This fails to meet the adequate procedures requirement of the UK Bribery Act. The law expects companies to take reasonable steps to prevent bribery, and a passive acceptance of assurances is insufficient. This approach risks engaging with consultants who may be involved in illicit activities, thereby exposing Saipem to the offense of failing to prevent bribery. Another incorrect approach would be to interpret market intelligence broadly to include any information, regardless of its source or how it was obtained. This overlooks the critical distinction between legitimate market research and information obtained through unethical or illegal means, such as bribery or facilitation payments. Such a broad interpretation could inadvertently lead to the acceptance or use of information tainted by corruption, directly contravening the anti-bribery provisions of the UK Bribery Act. A further incorrect approach would be to assume that because the information is gathered in a foreign jurisdiction, UK law does not apply. The UK Bribery Act has extraterritorial reach, meaning it can apply to conduct occurring outside the UK if it involves a person with a close connection to the UK, or if the bribery is intended to obtain or retain business for a person connected to the UK. Therefore, ignoring the potential for bribery in foreign markets, even when gathering intelligence, is a significant regulatory failure. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of applicable regulations, particularly anti-bribery and corruption laws like the UK Bribery Act. This involves conducting thorough due diligence on all third parties, establishing clear internal policies and procedures for information gathering, and fostering a culture of ethical conduct. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel is paramount to ensure compliance and mitigate risk. Question 18. Analysis of a scenario where a Saipem project manager, while negotiating a critical contract with a new client in a region known for its complex business customs, is offered a valuable, unsolicited gift by a senior client representative. The gift is presented as a gesture of goodwill and is not directly tied to any specific contractual term, but its value exceeds the threshold typically considered a minor token of appreciation under Saipem's internal guidelines. Option A. Accept the gift, acknowledging it as a customary business practice in the region, and inform the client that Saipem appreciates their gesture. Option B. Accept the gift and discreetly offer a reciprocal gift of similar or greater value to the client representative at a later date. Option C. Politely decline the gift, stating that Saipem's policy prohibits accepting gifts of significant value without reporting the incident internally. Option D. Immediately report the offer of the gift to Saipem's compliance department and await further guidance before responding to the client. Correct answer is D. Immediately report the offer of the gift to Saipem's compliance department and await further guidance before responding to the client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Saipem employees due to the inherent conflict between maintaining client relationships and adhering to strict anti-bribery and corruption regulations. The need for careful judgment arises from the subtle nature of potential inducements and the imperative to uphold Saipem's ethical standards and legal obligations. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent reporting mechanism. This aligns with the principles of robust corporate governance and the zero-tolerance policy towards bribery and corruption mandated by international standards and likely embedded within Saipem's internal policies, which are designed to comply with relevant anti-bribery legislation. By immediately reporting the offer, the employee demonstrates integrity, upholds their duty to the company, and allows Saipem's compliance department to assess the situation and take appropriate action, thereby mitigating legal and reputational risks. This adheres to the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the company and to prevent illegal activities. An incorrect approach would be to accept the offer, even if it appears to be a minor gesture or a customary practice in certain regions. This would constitute a direct violation of anti-bribery laws and Saipem's code of conduct, exposing both the employee and the company to severe penalties, including fines, debarment from future contracts, and criminal prosecution. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the offer or downplay its significance. This failure to report a potential ethical breach undermines the company's compliance framework and creates an environment where corruption can fester. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the company's commitment to ethical business practices. A third incorrect approach might be to seek advice from colleagues informally without involving the designated compliance channels. This circumvents established procedures, potentially leading to inconsistent advice or a failure to escalate the matter appropriately, thereby increasing the risk of non-compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to company policy and legal requirements. This involves understanding the company's code of conduct and compliance policies, recognizing potential red flags, and knowing the designated channels for reporting ethical concerns. When faced with a situation like this, the immediate step should be to consult internal compliance resources or a designated ethics officer. This ensures that the matter is handled according to established procedures and with the necessary expertise. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that Saipem's project development team has received preliminary, unconfirmed reports of a significant potential delay in a major offshore construction project due to unforeseen technical challenges. The communications department is aware of the potential market sensitivity of such news. Which of the following actions best aligns with Saipem's regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities? Option A. Downplay the significance of the preliminary reports in internal communications and await further developments before considering any external communication. Option B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the potential delay and outlining the steps being taken to assess and mitigate the situation, while emphasizing that the information is preliminary. Option C. Inform key institutional investors and analysts privately about the potential delay to allow them to prepare for the news. Option D. Wait for definitive confirmation of the delay and its exact impact before making any public announcement to avoid premature market speculation. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the potential delay and outlining the steps being taken to assess and mitigate the situation, while emphasizing that the information is preliminary. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and promptly. Saipem, as a publicly listed entity, operates under strict regulatory oversight designed to protect investors and maintain market integrity. The pressure to manage public relations can tempt individuals to delay or selectively disclose information, which can lead to market manipulation or misleading stakeholders. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial interests with legal and ethical duties. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to regulatory disclosure requirements. This means Saipem's communications team, upon receiving preliminary, unconfirmed information about a potential significant project delay, should immediately consult with legal and compliance departments to assess the materiality of the information and determine the appropriate disclosure timeline and content according to the relevant regulatory framework. This proactive and compliant approach ensures that the market receives accurate information in a timely manner, preventing insider trading and maintaining investor confidence. The regulatory justification lies in upholding principles of market fairness and preventing information asymmetry, which are cornerstones of securities regulation. An incorrect approach would be to withhold the information until a definitive confirmation is obtained, even if the preliminary indications suggest a significant delay. This failure to disclose material non-public information promptly, when there is a reasonable expectation of its impact on Saipem's share price, violates disclosure obligations. Another incorrect approach would be to issue a vague or misleading statement that downplays the potential impact of the delay, thereby creating a false impression for investors. This constitutes a breach of the duty of care and honesty owed to the market. A third incorrect approach would be to selectively disclose the information to certain stakeholders before a public announcement, which could lead to accusations of insider trading and market manipulation. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the potential impact of the information on the company's financial performance and share price. This should be followed by an immediate consultation with legal and compliance experts to understand the specific disclosure obligations under the applicable regulatory framework. The next step involves assessing the urgency and materiality of the information and determining the appropriate communication strategy that ensures compliance with all regulatory requirements, prioritizing accuracy and timeliness above all else. Question 20. Process analysis reveals that a Saipem project manager has inadvertently received an email containing preliminary, unconfirmed details about a competitor's significant financial difficulties, which, if true, could substantially impact the competitive landscape for upcoming bids. The project manager, recognizing the potential strategic value, has shared this information with a senior executive involved in bid preparation. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for Saipem, adhering strictly to UK financial regulatory frameworks and SISI guidelines? Option A. Forward the email to the competitor's company to verify the information, thereby ensuring accuracy before any internal decisions are made. Option B. Immediately incorporate the information into Saipem's bidding strategy to gain a competitive edge, assuming the information is accurate and will likely become public soon. Option C. Halt all bid preparation related to the affected projects and await official confirmation or denial of the competitor's situation from public sources. Option D. Initiate a confidential internal review by Saipem's compliance and legal departments to assess the materiality and public status of the information, and ensure no trading or bid-related decisions are made based on it until its status is clarified and it is publicly disclosed. Correct answer is B. Immediately incorporate the information into Saipem's bidding strategy to gain a competitive edge, assuming the information is accurate and will likely become public soon. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to secure a competitive advantage and the regulatory obligation to maintain fair and transparent market practices. Saipem, as a publicly listed entity, is subject to regulations designed to prevent insider trading and ensure market integrity. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely information dissemination with the prohibition of using material non-public information for personal or corporate gain. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate business intelligence gathering and the misuse of privileged information. The correct approach involves Saipem's compliance department immediately initiating a thorough internal investigation to ascertain the nature and materiality of the information obtained. This investigation must be conducted discreetly and in accordance with Saipem's internal policies and relevant regulatory guidelines. If the information is deemed material and non-public, Saipem must then ensure that no trading decisions are made based on this information until it is publicly disclosed. This adheres to the principle of equal access to information for all market participants, a cornerstone of securities regulation. Specifically, this aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations prohibiting insider dealing, which aim to maintain investor confidence and the fairness of financial markets. An incorrect approach would be to immediately leverage the information to inform Saipem's bidding strategy, without verifying its materiality or public status. This carries a significant risk of violating insider trading regulations, as it implies acting on information that is not available to the general public and could provide an unfair advantage. Such an action would be a direct contravention of regulatory frameworks designed to prevent market abuse. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the information entirely, assuming it is not significant enough to warrant investigation. This is a failure of due diligence. Companies have a responsibility to assess potential market-moving information, and a passive approach can lead to overlooking critical compliance issues or missed opportunities that could have been pursued legitimately once the information was public. A third incorrect approach would be to disclose the information internally to a select group of individuals without a clear need to know, and without a robust process for managing its confidentiality and eventual public release. This creates a risk of selective disclosure, which can also be a regulatory violation, as it can lead to an unfair advantage for those privy to the information before it is widely disseminated. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment. First, identify the information and its potential materiality. Second, consult with legal and compliance departments to understand the regulatory implications. Third, implement a pause on any actions that could be construed as trading on non-public information. Fourth, conduct a thorough investigation to determine the information's status and develop a plan for its appropriate disclosure or use, always prioritizing regulatory compliance and market integrity.